we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Welcome to another episode of the Energy Impact Podcast. Our guest today is Brynne Kennedy, the managing partner and co-founder at BCP Ventures. Brynne, great having you on.
Thanks so much, Michael. Great to be here.
Yeah. Before we talk about all the cool investments and activity that you guys have going on, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Massachusetts and have lived all over the world. So I never know how to answer that question really very well. But
so I have the same problem. How young did you move? I think that's the distinction.
Well, I grew up doing gymnastics, so I was traveling and competing all the time, all over. But yeah, so these days, yes, I run BCP Ventures, and I split my time between New York, LA, and increasingly Switzerland. But also like to say I live on a plane mostly. And my journey to get here was also interesting. So I started my career in finance, so traditional investment banking and private equity. And I lived all over Hong Kong, Singapore, India through that experience. Got my MBA at London Business School, so lived in London for about a decade and started a software company in London that I led for about a decade as the founder and CEO. So first in London, and then we moved it to Silicon Valley, which brought me back to the US. And I got really involved as the CEO, first in London with the David Cameron administration, and then secondly, back in the US with Congress, and at the time, the Trump administration and the California state government on effectively working together on policies for the innovation economy. So how do we create more companies, more investment into solving the biggest problems of our future? And, that's a conversation that starts with the education system, moves quickly to public-private partnerships and tax incentives and all kinds of different things. And that led me, after having been a CEO for 10 years, to step away and throw my hat in the ring to run for Congress in California, really on a platform of bringing people together around the concept of innovation, job creation, entrepreneurship, incentives, and solving big, big problems, one of which is energy transition and climate change. So I did that, lost my campaign, story for another day, but great experience in many ways. But also I learned that the public sector is a rather challenging way to solve the very large problems, having come from an investment and entrepreneurship background. So after that experience, I kind of decided to put together all the different parts of my career, the finance, the entrepreneurship, and the legislative, to build an energy transition venture capital and investment firm. So my partners and I founded the firm about a year and a half ago, and we have a big vision to back the companies of the future that will power our energy transition, both in what I call a vertical way, so new technologies specifically for generating renewable energy, reducing consumption, or cleaning up oil and gas, and also what we call the horizontal technologies that enable energy transition, so enterprise blockchain, edge networks, and the like.
Hardware and software. Okay, well,
yeah.
I'm going to make you peel apart what is like basically 3 lifetimes of work instant, only a handful of years. So, okay, so you started with kind of moving around a lot. You were in gymnastics. Talk us about that transition, gymnastics to finance. I can't imagine that was a super common pathway. How did that part?
Yeah,
Let's start at the very
yeah. Well, there was college in between.
yeah. Is
Yeah.
that where gymnastics up till college? I mean, I have friends. My wife is a gymnast. I know how grueling that process can be. Was college sort of the cutoff?
Yeah.
Okay, real world time.
So I did gymnastics all growing up for the country, for the US. And then um, I got pretty badly hurt when I was 15 and kind of transitioned my focus from going to the Olympics to going to college and completing my gymnastics career, but also getting, great education. So that led me to go to Yale, and I did compete in gymnastics for 4 years at Yale. We went to Ivy League championships. I got, it's Division I, 4 varsity letters, all that. A great experience, great end to it, but also an opportunity to kind of think about a future beyond the sport. So I did study history at Yale, ironically enough, but because I'm a big believer in liberal arts education, but I also had the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about Wall Street and interact with people whose families had come from that world, and in many cases mine had not, and got really interested in that. So after college, I worked at Lehman Brothers, and then it was one of the early folks in a private equity fund that Dubai World and Standard Chartered started. And it was a great experience. I like to say that investment banking is like a graduate degree after college.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, it was a
history.
good good start.
Give us a layer of that. Yeah, history. I mean, you're working your tail off on gymnastics. You were working your tail off on this liberal arts intense degree, and then you're like, well, why not just keep working my tail off in finance as an analyst? But that's like a different skill set altogether, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's a bit like learning a foreign language, kind of. It's a skill, like anyone can learn finance, I think. And I'm, a big believer in liberal arts education, just the ability to develop critical thinking and problem solving skills and put dots together. And I think, history is a huge part of that. But at Yale, I also had studied Mandarin, Chinese, and so I did sort of a lot of my thesis work around uh, economic development history, more recent actually, and looking at China and some of I think they used to call them Asian tigers, Singapore, Korea, etc. So there's a little bit of a mix of like economic innovation, company creation, and history. So when I graduated and started working at Lehman Brothers, I actually did that in Hong Kong so that I could kind of bring both things together.
And yeah, fascinating. Yeah, so starting to see how these themes percolated into some platforms today. Okay, well, let's keep moving then through that pathway. So you were at Lehman, you were on kind of the advisory side, and then you said you worked on private equity after that. And tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so when I was at Lehman, I did a deal. I was part of a deal that was focused on redeveloping the Delhi airport. And so we had the client had a lot of land around the Delhi airport and was going through a process of selling that to hotel developers to build this hospitality zone to help finance the actual infrastructure redevelopment. And I had the job of traveling throughout the Middle East and Asia with the client and pitching this opportunity to all of these funds. And I remember I was in the meetings and I kept thinking, gosh, it's so much more fun to be on that side of the table where you're making a decision about whether or not to invest and how to value this, and rather than on my side of the table where I'm like doing client services. And so I started thinking, good advisory basis, but which I think is an important skill. But I wanted to be have the opportunity to be a principal, the one making the decisions. So I got connected with a group of people at the time. Standard Chartered Bank was starting a platform of joint venture private equity funds across different areas, and they had partnered with Dubai World on, and they were the two GPs on setting up a new private equity fund focused on real estate, really. throughout Asia. So I was able to join that kind of from the ground up, participate in raising the fund. We raised a $550 million fund, of which they had put in 300. So we raised about 250 more. Can't remember the exact numbers, but something like that. And then I was able to kind of cut my teeth on the investment side and learn those fundamentals. So that was great. It was 2008, so the timing was not awesome. If everyone rewinds, that was when Dubai went bankrupt and Abu Dhabi bailed them out, and Dubai World struggled to be a GP in this new fund. So we ended up, to make sort of a long story short, Standard Chartered took over, and it was a confluence of things and just kind of a different experience than I had expected. So decided that it was time to go to business school, and that I remember I was like, the next fund that I do, I'm going to be the GP and like be the principal, not be, a participant in this. So went to business school, built a company, and then here we are now. I am a GP.
Yeah, but that wasn't linear either, right? Because what you just said, a lot of people, I think, probably have a similar experience. Maybe not as many through such a large macroeconomic cycle, but you were also a student of these cycles throughout time, right? So you decided to go to business school, but then you went in and became an operator. Was that something that happened while you were at business school, or did you have this idea for the company prior to going to business school?
It was a little bit of a combination. I mean, I felt like I had learned the advisory side, learned the investing side, to a base level, and that I hadn't had the opportunity to really get my teeth into a business beyond the financial aspect of it, which obviously is super important, but I did want to learn the operating side of it. So that was kind of a lens with which I went to business school. I kind of stumbled into founding the company because what my prior company, Topia, did was help. We disrupted the global relocation space. So at the time, I had lived all over Hong Kong, Singapore, India, and I had so many friends that had also lived all over. To be quite honest with you, it's like one of these things where everyone in London or Hong Kong or Zurich or wherever goes to like literally like a bar, and it's like, why is it so hard to move around the world? Like, my company sucks at this. Like, it's so archaic. I have to call all these people and print and fill out forms. So we just kind of would always talk about this, and I was like, wow, like there's probably an opportunity to apply technology to this archaic service industry and also give more people the opportunity to more seamlessly interact with different cultures and live in different places. So that was kind of the basis of what became Topia 10 years later, which is a comprehensive global HR management platform used by many of the largest companies on earth. So, it was kind of linear, but kind of opportunistic also.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And how many great companies are founded, right? Is identifying the problem first, right?
Yeah,
Defining
totally.
the problem and then solving it. Yeah, I'm sensing a theme here where your degree of difficulty with whatever you do is at the absolute max, right? You're like, I want to be an operator. Let's start a business. But I guess that's why you are who you are, right?
I guess, yeah.
Okay, so you're an operator. You built this platform up. You learned a ton of lessons, and then you combined all of these and said, okay, I want to solve the public sector problem too. I mean, walk us through that thought process.
Yeah, I was really lucky to start Topia during business school at London Business School in London. And it was at a time where there was a lot of dialogue about how to make London the startup hub of Europe. And a lot of that was led at the time by David Cameron and George Osborne. And it was like a really special time because they were very collaborative with everyone who was a part of the entrepreneur ecosystem. Many of my early investors, myself, fellow friends and founders, and there was a lot of dialogue. Like, they used to have breakfast at number 10 Downing Street every Friday and seek input. Like, there was a lot of events. Like, I think London had at that time a very unique overlap between the tech world and the government. Unlike the US, it's all based in London, so it's pretty concentrated. So, I was a part of that and saw, I was running a company, I was young, but like many of my early angel investors who became close mentors and friends were kind of post their company building phase, and they were intimately involved in that. So I got to see that. And, quite honestly, it was really, really inspirational. Unfortunately, a lot of it changed after Brexit, but it was a really amazing thing to kind of be a part of in some way, and a really good example of how, when it works well, you can bring the innovation economy and, a pretty forward-looking government together to do great things. And, it succeeded. Like London today has tons of companies. Every major US venture capital fund has, invests in companies in London now. Tech City, which was the thing we all sort of created, is a huge thing. There's unicorns, like it worked. So that was amazing. And when I moved back to the US a few years later, I, had the interest in kind of continuing being a part of those conversations. The vehicle is a little different in the US for obvious reasons, but there's a group of CEOs in Silicon Valley that would effectively represent and lobby on behalf of the innovation economy at the state and federal level. So I was a part of that and just got really, similarly involved in that. And that really led me to say, okay, why don't I maybe give it a go, putting my money where my mouth is, and, try to do this in campaign politics. It's a different beast on that side of the world, but I'm glad I did it. And I think, learned a lot, but it is definitely more my passion to solve problems in the private sector and be a part of sharing that knowledge with government than sitting in Congress all day fighting.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, super commendable that you actually did so. I feel like everyone likes to, complain. You actually did something about it, which is awesome. Sometimes it's like we need more of that, right? On one hand, but on the other hand, I do tend to agree with you that we can't count on sort of public institutions to drive innovation, because there's just natural friction as a part of public institutions that's healthy, that makes innovation very challenging. Um, so yeah, it must have been a
Yeah.
really interesting journey. I don't know. I guess there's not a question there. That's poor hosting on my part, but
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I mean, I ran in an area that was heavily oriented to the other party, and really with a sort of quasi-entrepreneurial thesis that you could drive change, bring people together around the concept of innovating in the private sector and solving big problems of the future. And, in many ways it worked. Like, I ended up with 20% more than my party registration, and, there were a lot of beautiful things, but at the end of the day, retail politics is not about talking about, solving big problems through innovation. Unfortunately, in today's era, the campaign politics is more about us versus them than it is about real solutions. So, hopefully we will someday live in an era where that's not the case, but that is where we are today. So that makes it very difficult, I think, to affect that type of change from an elected office. So, I think there's a really, I learned a lot. There's a really important role for things like the IRA and other policy initiatives that can help to allocate more capital and more innovation to big problems like energy transition, like we're talking about today. But I just think that for me, it's better to be on the boards, investing in the companies, using my operator skills, helping to build those at global scale. So not just in the US, but in Europe as well. And bringing stakeholders together around that and interacting with multiple governments instead of perpetually running congressional campaigns.
yeah, it's certainly that all makes sense, right? I mean, you have sort of this unique blend of geography and tactical skills that help. I can imagine how it helps you be more successful in a competitive space like a venture environment. And then you obviously layer the the goal orientation, right? The mission orientation, and that's a pretty powerful cocktail. So tell us a little bit about how BCP came together, and then we'd love to hear some of the highlights, some of the cool deals, some of your favorite platform. It's unfair maybe to have favorites, but some of the highlight platform companies that you could share with us.
Sure. Well, my partner Roger Lang and I knew of each other through entrepreneurial stuff in Silicon Valley. And we got to know each other and decided that it was time to come together to start a firm to really progress solutions to the biggest problems and bring our experience on the operator side of the world to our companies. So in Roger's case, he's an incredibly special person who I'm just so grateful to work with. He founded 2 companies that he led and took public on NASDAQ, and then took a lot of his success from those companies and put it into pioneering a lot of sustainable agriculture initiatives and environmental science conservation initiatives. So he brings a lot more of the sort of scientific orientation and technical orientation to the fund. He's deeply, deeply connected in entrepreneurial ecosystems from 40 plus years of building companies. And then I bring a little bit more of the finance deal orientation to things. So it's a really good fit, underpinned by shared values, shared history as entrepreneurs and operators, and great mutual respect for one another. And then we have a third venture partner Andrew, who we both have gotten to know. Roger's known him a little longer than I have, and they've done a lot of things together. And he brings some really interesting strategic perspectives and has advised a lot of funds, been a part of large private and public companies. So we have a really great partnership, and that's kind of how we got to where we are today. What we really want to do is prove that you can be a part of solving the biggest problems around energy and climate and generating an outsized return through a combination of company selection, roll up your sleeves, help people build the companies, and portfolio strategy. And that is exactly what we're doing. So we decided, we originally started our first fund, which we just have closed, was focused on sort of the concept of reinventing food and energy and infrastructure, kind of the underpinnings of society, as we like to think about it, the most foundational parts of society. As we look ahead, we're narrowing our focus into energy transition specifically. And that is largely because we think, that's the largest investment opportunity. That's the most foundational thing when we think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, climate, equity across the world. It's $100 trillion investment gap. 800 million people still don't have access to reliable power. We have a fossil fuel industry that, whether you like it or not, will be the majority of our power sources still for 50, 60 more years. And we need investment there to clean it up, make it more efficient. At the same time, we have to increase renewable generation. At the same time, we have to, move to smart everything and reduce resource consumption. So, that's a space that we understand well and that we're really, really excited about.
Yeah. You described it well earlier. Maybe give us another layer of that thesis around the vertical solutions and the horizontal solutions, which I interpreted as hardware and software, but that may be unfair.
Yeah, I mean, it is to some extent. I think so. We have an industry thesis and then we have a technology thesis. So our industry thesis is, I think, if you think about the energy transition curve, there's sort of, I think about it as 3 segments. There's what I call supply increase. So that's increasing the amount of renewable energy that we can generate, whether that's solar or that's batteries or that's wind or hydrogen, like that's renewable generation. Then we have what I call demand reduction. So there's, how do we just consume less? That's smart homes, smart windows, smart buildings, EVs, all of that type of thing. And then I think we have what I call oil and gas improvement or cleanup. Many energy transition funds or folks who think about climate think about it in a kind of binary way, and they will also invest in oil and gas. We actually believe that a lot of the oil and gas companies are the ones that are investing heavily in pioneering the future, are investing into new technologies, are in need of new technologies being sold to them to reduce emissions or streamline operations. So that's kind of how we think about the three thematic areas. If you think about all the things that I just mentioned, underpinning that is like a horizontal layer, which is what technologies do you need to make all of that true? And we believe that if you cannot talk about renewable energy or demand reduction without talking about a greater distribution of data and using that data. And that fundamentally can't happen in a central cloud. That happens with a distributed ledger, e.g. blockchain. That happens with data being used at the point of capture of those nodes, e.g. edge network platforms. And so we also invest into kind of the raw technology innovation that can service the energy transition industry. Now, many of those companies also sell to other verticals, but fundamentally it's all about making things more efficient and powering a cleaner and smarter world.
Yeah, I want to, maybe it's a pet, not a peeve, maybe it's like a focus of mine, because I love this discussion around hardware and software, and it's maybe one of the few industries, I can't take credit for describing it this way, but they're so symbiotic, right? Because what you just said is like totally hit it. You can't scale software in energy the same way you scale consumer software, because you need the hardware to enable it to happen. And you can't scale the hardware if you don't have the software to enable it to happen. How do you think about the allocation across those three themes and the tech stack that enable those things? Like, do you have a set 20, 20, 50, 10, or like, do you have that sort of proactive decision, or is it more opportunistic?
Yeah, we don't really separate it like that from an allocation perspective, because I think, to be quite honest with you, it's so intertwined. So we invest into companies that have, in most cases, the companies in the vertical side that we invest into have a hardware and a software component.
I see.
They are a battery that also captures a lot of data, that also needs a blockchain or an edge platform on top of it to connect that and power energy trading between them, or they are a piece of technology for oil and gas that reduces emissions in the separation process and also captures data around that, and you can look at it on your phone. So I would say in most cases, our companies, even on the energy generation side, where it is predominantly a hardware sale initially, also have a technology roadmap. And then if you think about, we're also investing into technologies that can be a part of that technology roadmap. They may sell to our other portfolio companies. It's like really annoying when investors try to like marry their portfolio companies, but sometimes it's also helpful. So sometimes they might sell to our, existing hardware technology companies to advance the software roadmap, or sometimes they may just be independent and they may be selling to, other energy companies and or industrial companies and the like. So that's how we think about this kind of vertical and horizontal enablement.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Can you share some of the, I've been chastised at saying favorites because I know it's a bit like children maybe, but can you share what are like some of the more exciting platform companies at the moment that you could share with us?
Well, I'll tell you at first, it's funny, Roger and I like to say we love all of our children and we want all of them to succeed and all of them to graduate go to college or whatever analogy you use. So we have a couple companies that are super interesting. I'll answer the question a little bit differently and maybe talk about our latest stage investment.
Yeah, perfect.
So we're super excited about a company called Caban Systems, CABAN. They were founded in order to provide a renewable backup power source for the telecommunications industry, started with a focus on Latin America. So, the vast majority of the telecommunications industry in the vast majority of the world is powered by diesel generators. And that means that operators are spending huge amounts of money on fuel each year. It's dirty. It's the hottest commodity also in an emerging market. And then, there's rolling brownouts and blackouts. And in many of these same countries, they don't have a reliable grid either. So you have sometimes more telecom power than you have traditional grid. So what Kaban does, they sell a battery that is renewable, solar powered, and other things to telecom tower operators. And they install that there. They remove the diesel generator. They provide the power. And then they have a software platform on top of that that enables them to power a whole what we call energy as a service model. So they take over the management of all of the power, the maintenance, the software platform optimizes it through a combination of AI and machine learning. And so if you play this out over time, the batteries get installed all over the telecom infrastructure. The software powers a dynamic energy trading use case between the batteries to optimize supply and demand, and also a trading use case back to the main grid where possible to optimize peaks and troughs. So super exciting. The founder is amazing and, super special for me because she's a woman, which I really don't get to work on much. And she is Guatemalan, so she kind of grew up really deeply understanding this problem. Initially as targeted Latin America, we operate in 12 countries in Latin America. We are expanding rapidly into the US as well as Africa and the Middle East, and growing at about 400% or 500% top line annually. So we led their Series B and are super excited about that one.
Awesome. Yeah. How does that, so they're still charging from the grid, or is there an attached solar or other generation source tied to that?
No, it's not at all tied to the grid. It's an independent generation source, largely solar.
Okay. Yeah. So they're doing the full package, the gen plus the battery. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
cool. And then, so it's in a telecom tower. Yeah, I guess it's not such a large power need. You probably oversize solar a little bit, and that allows you some optimization capacity. And then you probably have some capacity you have to save in case there is a challenge, right? You still have to supply the tower in some form or fashion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Super cool. Yeah, it's funny. I think there's this, that's a great example because I think there is a very US centric focus in the energy transition dialogue. And some of that's biased because I'm here and you're based here somewhat when you're not on a plane. So it's fun to hear. Like, I think sometimes the stories about other countries perhaps being in front of the US don't get talked about enough. And so it's cool that business was proved out over many other countries, and now you're bringing it back to the US is a cool story.
Yeah, it's interesting because they, they're based in Silicon Valley, but Alex, the founder, really knew the Latin American market well. We work with the largest operators in the continent. As I said, 12, I think soon to be closer to 15 or 16 countries. And there's a huge demand in the US market as well. It is so funny when I remember doing the Series B, my lawyer was like, oh, in Fairfield County, Connecticut, they have all diesel generators too. Like, maybe I should talk to the town, like buying Kaban. So there's a slightly different use case. It's about hardening telecom sites. It's about, again, optimizing peaks and troughs. If you think about something like California is a good example, or Texas, as opposed to kind of having no grid in some other countries, but the use case is the same. And I think like the vision here, if we just move this up and we have similar visions for other technologies, is, I think fundamentally where the energy market will go over the next 20 years is to a much more localized and grid independent energy generation at a lot of different points around the world. And then what that means is you need a way to connect all of that energy generation and optimize the supply and demand. Like the super simple example I always use is like, you might not use all of your solar panel capacity in your home, and I might need extra. Like we need a way to interact with each other. And that's where that horizontal software piece comes in, because you and I can't dynamically trade energy, let alone back to an aging older grid or to like John Doe over there, without something like both edge network technologies to use the data that's captured in each of our solar panels and a blockchain technology so that we can dynamically log and publicly log all of the different kind of inputs and outputs from a ledger perspective. So I think that's where we're going. I think in terms of the like hardware side, we're still at the point of just like rolling it out and getting the generation point. And in terms of the software, distributed software side, we're still kind of at the point of developing those softwares and going through an adoption curve as well. But if you fast forward 20 years, I think the biggest opportunities for the world and for investors are fundamentally around the shift from a central cloud technology world to distributed and the use cases around that. And then the overlay of the $100 trillion energy transition market that is fundamentally a conversation on decentralization.
Yeah, I think I would say I agree with like 85 or 90% of that. I think the part that
wouldn't be a good podcast if you agreed with 100%.
Yeah, well, good. There you go.
There you go.
I struggle with, so I love the distributed vision, but there just seems to be such a barrier to reaching critical mass to make that a reality, right? Like there is, out of that 100 trillion, maybe it's like 40 trillion effectively on spec to get to a distributed grid hardware layer that can actually manage and deal with matching the software layer to track all of those transactions. And then the amount of storage and energy demand just to track all of those transactions in 30-second or 5-minute intervals or whatever it's going to be.
You've just perfectly articulated why we need an enterprise blockchain to underpin all of this.
Yeah, and maybe that's my background's more the energy, the old school, hard tech stuff. So perhaps I'm just not caught up with, I saw Amazon had their sort of sidewalk announcement and some of that low latency data. Yeah, I don't know. It feels to me like the end answer, which is I think what we're all wrestling with, right? Because that defines the steps we take to get there, is some mix of that distributed grid idea, like kind of a microgrid. I don't know if it's neighbor to neighbor, but it's a microgrid type solution with central interconnections. I don't think we get away from that idea of some broader transmission grid. I just think we've realized we're not good at managing, maintaining, and scaling that larger grid.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have an investment in a software company called Protexo, which is an edge network platform. Protexo means edge in Latin, and in case you forgot your high school Latin class. So I studied Latin for like 8 years.
You do languages. I talk math. You talk language.
Well, not that well, because one of my first questions when I was diligencing the company, I'm like, what does Protexo mean? They're like edge in Latin. I'm like, oh, I did well on that course. But so what they do is they allow for the creation of microclouds in localized environments. So if you think about like wind turbines is a good example. So you could put a cloud at one wind turbine and then analyze data there, or you could like combine a localized community of wind turbines. It could be like the country of Finland, or it could be like the city of Helsinki, or it could be like a neighborhood in Helsinki, or an individual wind turbine. This might not be the best example, but you know where I'm going with this. And then that allows for that data to be aggregated, analyzed, and used. And so that's kind of what you were just talking about of, do we get to like this beautiful utopian vision of all of just like individual energy generation points all over the world, or do we kind of end up more with a world where there's generation that's distributed than some form of what one may call regional aggregation, or a lot of people call it a virtual power plant. And then from there, the trading is kind of powered. I think that's an interesting question, and I think it's probably going to be a combination, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and it does become very market specific. I mean, you even uh, the telecom example is a good one. Same product, but different use case or different, right, across different geographies, really kind of solving a different problem. And I guess that's probably where like in population dense areas, it probably becomes more of a consumer product because there's a more elaborate sort of system. And then in your more distributed rural areas, it's probably more sort of a co-op and muni, a modernized co-op and muni type structure. Yeah, interesting. Well, I think we're kind of talking about it already. So like, next 5-10 years, where do you guys see yourselves differentiating versus other energy transition venture capital folks?
Yeah, I think it's really, I think it's kind of in three ways, and we sort of already talked about two of them, but just to summarize, our thesis is that renewable energy is decentralized energy, and whether it gets combined in some way or it stays fully decentralized and then traded, I think is a different conversation, but that's fundamentally our thesis, is we're moving from a point of central generation where energy is pushed out to decentralized energy generation where it needs to be kind of pulled in and traded. And so we're investing into the prior conversation, hardware generation at those decentralized nodes. We're investing into horizontal technologies that can do that, can regionalize or pull together groups of those nodes, and that can then power that trading side. That use case exists on the horizontal side in other industries too, which is really exciting about those particular investment use cases. But the other place that we differentiate is we think oil and gas is a part of the solution as well. We like to say we are pragmatists, not purists. By mid-century, oil and gas would still represent 60 to 70% of energy generation, even if we do everything well and right on the renewable side. And so what that means is you need people working with those companies to invest into technologies that effectively clean up the environmental footprint of those companies. So, example of this is another investment. We have a company called Elite Measurement. They have a patented technology that replaces really legacy equipment that emits the equivalent of 1 trillion cars worth of emissions per year across all of the wells in the world. Our technology does the same process, separates oil, gas, and water when it's extracted from the ground, and emits 0 emissions. And that's a massive environmental impact. So I think we're very visionary, as we just talked about sort of where we're moving and pushing the envelope on the decentralized renewable side of things. But we're also very pragmatic about playing a role and being the bridge to that future world. And that's why I think, if you put on your financial hat, a lot of our portfolio construction is really, really attractive because it balances vision with pragmatism. It balances later stage with earlier stage. It will balance geographies over time too.
Yeah. I should have I'm glad you brought it up because it is a distinction and I think it's a good one. It's worth reemphasizing what you said. Even if everyone's like grand plans play out in the best case scenario, we are still what 50, 60, 70% fossil based. I mean, even if it's not energy, it's other fuels, it's other products. That's super interesting. So are you guys is carbon capture a thing for you guys? Or is it I like these edge cases better, I think, because I feel like the oil and gas guys themselves know carbon capture best. But these sorts of marginal is the wrong word because it's such a big impact, but different methane data tracking and capturing, right? Some of these things that are side thoughts, I'm we need more people focusing on.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done anything in carbon capture, but it's certainly on the table. We just, we do, from a portfolio perspective, we're not the firm that does hundreds and hundreds of investments and sort of praise that one of them is worth $1 billion. We have a pretty concentrated, focused investment approach. We're incredibly hands-on with our companies, and we have a very high bar for something getting through because of that. There's a capacity challenge always. So we haven't done anything yet, but like I said, it's certainly a part of the conversation.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, well, very cool. I know we're running a bit up on time. Anything that we didn't talk about that we should have?
No, I don't think so. You're a pretty good host. That's like you even got to the 90% only agreement with me.
Yeah, well, you're a convincing story. No, it's really cool. I love having these and hearing the different theses and how people describe sort of the themes, and there's always some similarities, but the differences, I think, are what's so promising, right? Is that we have people focusing on slightly different areas. Yeah, we're super excited to have you on, and really excited to see what you are, continue to invest in at BCP.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.